The question hangs in the air like a whisper bleeding through reality, begging not for an answer, but for a witness. It is a question that should never have been asked. A question no mortal mind was meant to contemplate. Yet the story of Hellion Mordrin begins in that forbidden space, between despair and desire, where the warp itself starts to breathe against the skin of a dying world. Hellion was not special by any measure known to the Imperium. He was a scribe of the lower archives, one of the countless billions who lived and died beneath flickering lumen lights in forgotten corners of humanity's decaying empire. His life had been a parade of monotony, ink-stained documents, endless hours at a rusting cogitator, and the slow suffocation of dreams he had once believed he would chase. But the galaxy had no mercy for mediocrity, and Hellion had long since surrendered to that truth. He was simply another human drifting toward death, unnoticed and unloved by the colossus he served. Yet on the plague-scarred world of Dathalon, obscurity offered no safety. The planet had been dying long before Hellion was born. Its skies were perpetually gray, choked with drifting particulates from industrial sprawls that had collapsed centuries ago. Rain fell thick with chemical residue, leaving slick trails that shimmered iridescent in the dim light. Disease was a constant companion. Coughing echoed through the hab blocks at all hours, and the stench of decay lingered in every corridor. But the Imperium did not care. Dathalon produced the raw ores it needed, and so it was permitted to rot. Hellion's own family had been consumed by that rot. His mother died first, taken by a lungworm infestation that spread like wildfire through their settlement. His younger sister followed, her frail body collapsing under a fever that boiled her blood. His father, unable to endure the grief, vanished into the southern wastelands, abandoning his son to the mercy of bureaucratic assignment. By 22, Hellion Mordrin had lost everything, and the grief that should have crushed him instead hollowed him out. All that remained was the quiet ache of yearning for purpose, for sensation, for anything that could prove he was still alive. And that yearning did not go unnoticed. At first, the corruption touched him as a faint whisper at the edges of his perception, a murmur threading itself through the monotony of his work. Some days, it felt like a sigh carried through the cold air, comforting in a way no human ever had. On other days, it felt like a warm breath against his ears, a voice promising that life could be more vivid, more powerful, more intoxicating. Hellion tried to dismiss it as stress, as overwork, as the slow mental erosion that so many on Dathalon suffered. But the whispers persisted. They grew bolder. They grew intimate. Nurgle was the first to reach him, though Hellion did not yet know the nature of that presence. It came to him in his sickness, when a lingering cough deepened into painful spasms. As he lay in his cramped habitation cell, feverish and weak, he felt something wrap around him, not physically, but spiritually. A cold, heavy blanket of comfort. A presence that spoke without words, offering not release from pain, but acceptance of it. A sense that his suffering was not meaningless. That decay was not the end, but the beginning of belonging. It was a twisted warmth, monstrous yet tender, and Hellion, desperate for any scrap of solace, unknowingly welcomed it. But the second presence was nothing like the first. Slaanesh came to him in his despair, not during sickness but during the lonely moments in which he stared at the rusted ceiling of his cell and wondered if there was more to life than breathing and dying. That whisper was a thrill, sharp, electric, seductive. It flooded him with foreign emotions, longing, excitement, hunger. It promised sensations he had never imagined, experiences that broke the boundaries of the mundane, pleasures and terrors intertwined with exquisite precision. Where Nurgle soothed, Slaanesh stirred. Where Nurgle embraced, Slaanesh tempted. And for a man drowning in emptiness, both gifts felt like answers. He did not realize he had accepted them. No mortal ever does. But acceptance is irrelevant in the warp. A crack in the soul is enough. And Hellion's soul had become a cracked vessel long ago. What followed was subtle at first. Hellion's dreams changed. He wandered through vast gardens where vines dripped with sweet-smelling rot. He walked through marble corridors where light glimmered off surfaces too perfect to exist. He saw figures in the mist, some laughing, some singing, some sobbing, but their voices were too distant to understand. When he woke, the air around him felt humid, heavy, vibrating faintly with something that was not real. Yet he felt alive, more than he had ever felt in his waking life. But with these dreams came the first signs of danger. His coworkers noticed his eyes lingering too long on the dancing glow of malfunctioning lumen strips. They noticed he smiled faintly at things no one else could see. They noticed how he seemed both exhausted and invigorated at the same time, as though some invisible force tugged at him from different directions. They whispered about him when he wasn't listening. On Dathalon, strange behavior was often a death sentence. The Imperium feared mutation and corruption more than it feared death itself. Hellion, however, had no fear, only confusion. He felt emotions crashing within him like turbulent tides, sorrow that clung to him like wet cloth, desire that burned like a fever in his blood, apathy and longing swirling in violent patterns. He would sit alone in his cell and feel both numb and overwhelmed. Empty and overflowing, rotting and blooming. He began to wonder if he was losing his mind. But something else was happening, something neither he nor the people around him could deny. Hellion was being noticed, not by mortals, not by any power in the material realm, but by two gods, each pulling him toward a destiny he could not comprehend. And every passing moment only deepened their interest. For in the endless void of the warp, surrounded by realms of madness and desire, two titanic entities stirred. Both whispering the same forbidden truth. This soul is mine. Hellion Mordrin's descent into the impossible did not begin with a revelation. It began with a feeling, a pressure behind his ribs, as though something inside him was swelling, pushing outward, stretching the limits of what a mortal frame could contain. The sensation was subtle at first, a flutter of unease that he told himself was nerves, exhaustion, or the residue of dreams too vivid to be natural. But as days passed, that pressure grew, becoming a steady thrum inside him, a rhythm that did not match the beat of his heart. It pulsed with its own cadence, its own hunger. Something was awakening, and it was awakening within him. Most mortals who brush against the warp do so only momentarily, fleeting dreams, passing whispers, moments of madness that vanish with the dawn. But Hellion was no longer brushing against it. The warp had begun to seep into him like water into cracked stone, claiming space where reason once lived. And the gods whose shadows loomed across that realm had marked him, not as a servant, not as prey, but as something far rarer, a contested prize. Among the chaos gods, conflict was the constant heartbeat of existence. Bloodshed, pleasure, decay, ambition, each force crashed endlessly against the others in a war older than mortal comprehension. Yet even amid that eternal struggle, certain boundaries were understood, if never respected. A mortal soul was a morsel, a candle of brief light in the cosmic void. Gods rarely battled over one. It was simply not worth the effort, not when billions more waited, ripe for corruption. But Hellion's soul, something about it was different. Perhaps it was the depth of his despair, rich and fertile like soil ready for decay. Perhaps it was the intensity of his yearning, sharp as a blade drawn across the senses. Or perhaps it was simply the randomness of the warp, the chaotic roll of reality's dice. But whatever the reason, two divine hungers had latched onto him with equal force. And that made Hellion's soul a battlefield unlike anything he could imagine. The first sign came during a coughing fit so violent that he collapsed against the floor of the archive wing, vision blurring at the edges. His fellow scribes watched him convulse with muttered concern but no real compassion. Illness was too common on Dathalon to stir sympathy. But what Hellion felt in that moment was not ordinary sickness. As his lungs seized and bile rose in his throat, he felt something brush against his consciousness, a cold, loving caress, like hands made of mud and moss cradling him from within. "You are not alone." The voice did not speak with sound. It bloomed inside him, warm and damp, comforting in a twisted way. A sense of belonging flooded him, thick and heavy. His pain dulled, his fear eased, and for one terrifying heartbeat, Hellion felt, cared for, cherished, nurtured by something vast and ancient. But before the warmth could fully settle, a second sensation ripped through him, sharp, electrifying, intoxicating. A breathless thrill spread across his skin, as though every nerve had awakened simultaneously. A whisper curled through his thoughts, silken and hungry. "You can be more." This voice was nothing like the first. It was vibrant, seductive, addictive. It filled him with an ecstasy so potent it bordered on agony. His senses erupted, colors brightened, sounds sharpened, and his awareness expanded until the world around him shimmered with impossible clarity. For a moment, he felt alive in a way he never had before, each heartbeat echoing with the promise of transcendence. Two whispers, two promises, two gods, and both wanted him. Hellion staggered to his feet, clutching the edge of a cogitator console as his coworkers muttered about reporting him to Medicae superiors. But he barely heard them. His mind was a storm. His body a vessel pulled in opposing directions. His soul was being courted, seduced, claimed, and he had no language to describe the enormity of what was happening. The whispers did not cease when he left work that night. They followed him through the rain-slicked streets, threading through the distant wails of sirens and the rattling coughs of plague victims. Sometimes the warm, heavy presence wrapped around him like a blanket of rotten comfort. Other times, a pulse of exquisite sensation rippled through him, leaving him breathless with desire and dread. He could not tell if he was being hunted or embraced, loved or devoured, but the gods knew. For in the rotting gardens of Nurgle's realm, a great unclean one stirred, its bloated mass quivering with paternal delight as it sensed the fragile human who had unknowingly opened his heart to despair. And in the shimmering palaces of Slaanesh, a keeper of secrets lifted its elegant, clawed hand, tracing the faint outline of a mortal soul that pulsed with exquisite emotional turmoil. Hellion's torment fed them both. His longing fed them both. His suffering, his beautiful, wretched suffering, was a banquet neither god wished to share. And so the battle began. Not with armies, not with blades, not with demons tearing the veil open, but with whispers, with dreams, with the quiet, relentless invasion of a mortal mind caught between rot and rapture. For Hellion Mordrin had become something impossibly rare. A soul claimed twice. A soul pulled toward two different eternities. A soul worth fighting for. And the warp does not fight gently. The days that followed blurred into a haze of fevered contradictions. Hellion no longer lived in a single reality. He drifted between two emotional worlds that twisted around one another like strangling vines. Every breath he took felt as though it belonged to someone else, someone halfway between ecstasy and decay. His senses flickered, overwhelmed one moment and numb the next. His mind stretched thin, pulled taut like a fraying rope caught between two colossal hands. And with each passing hour, the fracture inside him widened. It began subtly. A taste of sweetness on his tongue when he drank the metallic tasting water that dripped from the archive pipes. A faint scent of flowers, unfamiliar and intoxicating, lingering in the air of polluted corridors. His fingertips tingled with such intensity that it felt as though his own skin was alive, dreaming. But just as swiftly, these moments were replaced by waves of aching cold. He would feel dampness clinging to him like dew from some unseen swamp. His breath would fog even in warm rooms. His muscles would ache with the dull throb of unseen rot. It was as if two worlds were bleeding into him, one of pleasure, one of ruin. One seducing him closer, the other holding him in a grotesque embrace. And Hellion could no longer distinguish where one ended and the other began. The night the tearing truly began, the planet of Dathalon shivered. Hellion had returned to his habitation cell, exhausted to the bone, every thought dragging behind him like a chain. His cough had worsened, yet his heartbeat pulsed with strange exhilaration. He lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling as shadows shifted across it in unnerving ways. The atmosphere felt wrong, too heavy, too silent. The kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from anticipation, like the air before a scream. Then it hit him. A wave of sensation ripped through his mind so violently that he cried out, curling in on himself. His vision shattered into fragments, kaleidoscopic pieces of different worlds overlapping. He saw a lush, rotting garden where flowers oozed pus and vines writhed like living intestines. He saw a palace of impossible beauty where the walls shimmered like polished bone and every sound echoed like seductive laughter. The two visions collided, grinding together with unbearable force. Hellian's mind was caught between them, stretched across realms. He could feel himself splitting, not physically, but spiritually, like fabric being torn down the center. His heartbeat doubled, then tripled, then fractured into two rhythms, pulsing out of sync. A deep, bubbling voice pressed into his thoughts, warm and wet and endlessly patient. Do not fear, child, embrace what you are becoming. Let go, let rot. There is comfort in surrender. But before the comfort could settle, a second voice sliced through him like silk, sharp, thrilling, laden with pleasure and danger. No, not surrender, ascension. You are not meant to decay. You are meant to feel, to rise, to become magnificent. The voices collided inside him, twisting his consciousness into knots. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His body jerked, muscles spasming as though two sets of hands were pulling him in opposite directions. Sweat poured from him, cold one moment, burning the next. His skin crawled as if insects burrowed beneath it before dissolving into tingling waves of bliss. He clutched his skull, nails biting into flesh, desperate to hold himself together. But he was losing. His emotions spiraled, uncontrollable. He would weep one moment, laugh the next. His fear turned to excitement. His excitement turned to sorrow. His sorrow became numbness. His numbness erupted into desire. Every feeling devoured the one before it, growing wilder and more chaotic with each cycle. His body began changing too. Small lesions appeared on his arm, only to vanish minutes later in a shimmer of iridescent beauty. His breath alternated between foul, rotting stench and sweet, intoxicating fragrance. His heartbeat vibrated with two opposing energies, one heavy and sluggish, the other sharp and electric. And deep within his soul, the pressure reached a breaking point. Hellion screamed, not from pain, but from the overwhelming impossibility of being torn between two infinities. His voice echoed unnaturally, as though another version of him screamed alongside him, slightly out of sync. The walls trembled, lights flickered, the very air rippled. Something inside him ripped, not a metaphorical rip, a real tear, a rupture in the spiritual fabric of his being. He felt it distinctly, a clean, horrifying split, as unmistakable as cloth giving way under tension. His consciousness stuttered, two windows of thought opening where there had once been one. Two emotional cores awakening inside him. Two destinies clawing for space. And the tearing did not stop. It deepened, cracking him open like a vessel too full of boiling pressure. The warp took notice. On a level beyond sight, beyond sound, beyond comprehension, ripples of Hellion's fracture radiated outward. His soul flare lit the immaterium like a beacon, and the response was immediate. In Nurgle's realm, plague-fattened spirits stirred, drawn to their master's rising interest. In Slaanesh's domain, shimmering silhouettes danced with anticipation, eager to taste a soul-splitting under forbidden strain. And somewhere beyond mortal perception, demons began to gather, not to attack him, but to witness. For a soul tearing itself apart between two gods was a rare spectacle, a forbidden bloom in the garden of chaos. Hellion collapsed onto the floor, trembling uncontrollably, his mind a battlefield of whispers and sensations. He understood only one thing: something within him had changed forever. Something no human was meant to survive. And the gods were only just beginning to pull. The warp does not simply observe. It hungers. It reaches. It responds to suffering, longing, fear, desire, those fragile cracks in a mortal's mind where chaos finds purchase. And when a soul is torn open as violently as Helion's had been, the immaterium does not remain still. It surges like a tide toward blood in the water. The first to truly notice him, not with curiosity, but with intent, was a great unclean one known as Gorthmal the Generous. In the garden of Nurgle, amid fields of nauseating blooms and trees dripping with thick yellow ichor, the gargantuan demon paused mid-lumber. Its grotesquely swollen belly sloshed with rotten fluids. Flies buzzed around its sagging face in a constant cloud. Yet for all its monstrous form, the expression that spread across its putrid features was one of adoring warmth. It felt Helion's despair as clearly as a father hearing the cry of a newborn child. Such sorrow, such beautiful hopelessness, it murmured, its voice a bubbling rumble that turned the air to slime. He calls out to grandfather with every breath. But the words held more than affection. They held protectiveness, possessiveness. A single mortal soul was nothing to a great unclean one, unless Nurgle himself had taken interest. And Helion had not merely touched despair, he had embraced it with a depth that made even demons pause. Gorthmal extended a swollen hand and dipped its claw into a pool of virulent sludge. The surface rippled, revealing a distorted image of Helion curled on the floor of his cell, trembling in agony as invisible forces rent his spirit apart. Poor little sprout, Gorthmal crooned lovingly. He suffers alone. That will not do. Grandfather does not abandon his children. But even as the demon prepared to reach across the veil, an elegant silhouette stepped into the reflection, as though claiming space inside the vision itself. An impossibly tall figure, all slender beauty and predatory grace. Skin shimmering like opalescent silk. Eyes glowing with wicked delight. Claws tracing delicate arcs in the air. A keeper of secrets, Vaelith Nar, one of Slaanesh's favored agents. The two demons did not speak. They did not need to. Their hostility ignited instantly, an ancient rivalry sharpening their presence like blades. Vaelith tilted its head, lips curling into a knowing smile as it observed the trembling human. His vision blurred, the torchlight stretched into spiraling ribbons. His heartbeat thudded against his ribs, each pulse echoing like a war drum. He felt them both fighting over him, claiming him, pulling at the seams of his soul. Then the pain started. It wasn't physical, no wound or cut or burn. It was internal, deeper than bone, deeper than thought. It felt like two sets of claws raking across his essence, peeling back layers of identity like wet parchment. He gasped, clutching his head. The chamber shook. The flame flared, spitting sparks. And then, just for a moment, he heard something else. A third whisper. Quiet, distant, steady. Not a chaos god. Not a temptation. Not a promise. A memory. His own voice. A whisper from the past, spoken by a younger, untainted version of himself. I swore to stand for humanity, even if humanity never stands for me. The moment the memory surfaced, both gods shrieked, not in fear, but in fury. The chamber vibrated with psychic pressure, and cracks veined through the floor like spiderwebs. He wasn't theirs. Not yet. Not willingly. The realization hit like a bolt around. This wasn't corruption. This was a contest. A war for his soul, before he had even died. And he was trapped in the middle. As the candlelight pulsed violently and the voices crescendoed, Malthus whispered aloud, voice trembling through clenched teeth. Why me? And the torch went out. The chamber fell into absolute blackness. And in that darkness, both gods answered at once. Because you are rare. Because you are beautiful. Because you are broken. Because you can be ours. The whispers swarmed him. And then came the most chilling truth of all. Because you are beginning to choose. Darkness swallowed Malthus whole, vast and suffocating, like he had been dropped into the void between stars. No walls. No floor. No ceiling. Just an endless, choking nothingness where the two gods pressed in closer, their presence coiling around him like serpents vying for a single piece of prey. He tried to breathe, but his lungs felt filled with smoke. He tried to move, but his limbs were pinned by invisible pressure, like a colossal hand had cupped him, holding him in place. And then, slowly, a single dim light ignited before him. Not a torch, not a flame, not anything natural. It flickered like a pulse, weak, steady, rhythmic. A heart, a soul's heart, his soul's heart, a glowing ember of his essence, floating in the void like a dying star. Pale, trembling, barely holding shape. Every breath he took made it flicker. Every doubt he felt made it dim. Slaanesh's voice flowed around him first, seductive, melodic, liquid smooth. Look how fragile you are, how delicately your soul trembles. Let me soothe it. Let me refine you, perfect you. Her words curled through the dark in ribbons of pink and violet light, weaving around his soul heart like caressing fingers. But then came the other presence, heavy, bubbling, thick as a swamp fog. Nurgle's voice pressed against him, warm and smothering. Fragile. No. Precious. Wounded. Let me heal what has long festered inside you. Let me cradle you, protect you, love you as no one else ever has. A wave of mossy green light rolled forward, coating part of the soul heart in a soft, living glow. The two colors touched, pink brushing green, and instantly the void vibrated with tension. The gods weren't simply tugging anymore. They were colliding, like two storms clashing in a sky too small for either. Malthus strained, trying to stand, trying to pull away, but he had no body here. No armor, no flesh, only thought, only fear, and the two gods whispered deeper into that fear, each word cutting into him from opposite sides. Slaanesh, choose joy. Nurgle, choose peace. Slaanesh, choose beauty. Nurgle, choose acceptance. Slaanesh, choose me. Nurgle, choose me. His essence vibrated violently. Cracks formed across the soul heart's surface. A splitting pain tore through him, psychic, soul deep, dividing him down the middle. He felt Slaanesh's lure like fire licking open nerves. He felt Nurgle's embrace like mud filling the spaces inside him. He screamed. The scream didn't echo, it shattered. The void splintered like glass hit with a hammer. Fragments of darkness flew outward, revealing glimpses of impossible visions. A garden overflowing with rot, mushrooms pulsing like beating hearts. A palace of endless mirrors, each reflection twisting into shapes both exquisite and horrifying. His own face, split by faint lines of corruption, one side blooming with decay, the other carved with irresistible, painful beauty. A battlefield of demons ripping each other apart, not for victory, but for him. The visions flickered like lightning strikes, too fast to understand, too vivid to forget. Then came the tearing sound. A ripping, a shearing, like reality was fabric being pulled at both ends. From the soul heart, a hairline fracture formed down the center. Light bled from it, white at first, then shifting to nauseating greens and intoxicating purples. The crack hummed with power that made his very identity tremble. Slaanesh whispered, almost lovingly. Let it break, you will be reborn in ecstasy. Nurgle whispered, warm as fevered breath. Let it break, and I will make you whole again. The fracture widened. Malthus felt his consciousness stretch across both voices, pulled taut like a rope about to snap. Then, he felt something else. A presence. Distant, faint, but unmistakable. A ripple of light that wasn't pink or green. That wasn't rot or seduction. That wasn't chaos at all. It was gold. Soft, flickering, weak, but gold. The Imperium's light. The Emperor's faint whisper, far away, barely reaching him. Do not yield. Not a command. A plea. And that tiny plea, small, fragile, almost pathetic in the dead of the warp, made both chaos gods hiss in rage. Slaanesh's voice sharpened. He cannot have you. Nurgle's voice deepened. He never cared for you. The fracture exploded outward. The soul heart burst into two violently pulling halves, both still connected, both still tearing, both still screaming. Malthus felt agony unlike anything flesh could experience, like every memory he had ever formed was being ripped from one side of him and rewritten on the other. The void itself howled. Warp winds surged around him like hurricanes. Filth and perfume, decay and delight, rot and rapture. And for the first time, he realized something horrifying. This wasn't a contest. Not anymore. This was a war zone, and he was the ground both armies were fighting over. The tear in reality widened further, splitting into a raw wound of light and shadow. Something enormous stirred behind it, two vast shapes, incomprehensible, terrible, divine. They weren't avatars. They weren't demons. They were truths. Direct reflections of the gods themselves. Slaanesh reaching through liquid light. Nurgle swelling through rotted shadow. Both stretching toward him. Both touching the edges of his fractured soul. Both whispering, "You belong to us." The void collapsed. Malthus fell through warp storms, past shrieking demons, past ruptured visions of futures that were never meant to be. He tumbled through a canyon of screams and laughter, rotten silk, plague and pleasure. Fell, until something slammed into him from below. And reality snapped back. He woke up on his knees inside the meditation chamber, gasping like a drowning man clawing for air. Sweat drenched him. His vision swam. The room seemed to twist slightly, like it was still vibrating. From what he had seen, he looked at his gauntlets. They were shaking, and carved into the stone floor beneath him, where there had once been nothing, was a jagged scar, burned deep into the rock. A perfect split line, and glowing faintly with both green and violet light. For a long moment, Malthus could not move. His breath rasped in and out like a dying machine, catching in his throat as the cold air of the meditation chamber stung his lungs. Every inch of his armor felt heavier, like it had absorbed the weight of the warp itself. The crack in the stone floor pulsed faintly beneath him, an ugly split carved straight down the center of the chamber. The line glowed with two impossible colors, Nurgle's rotting green, wet and pulsing like mold flourishing on flesh, and Slaanesh's violet-pink shimmer, soft and alluring like perfume turned physical. Nothing mortal, nothing sane, could make a mark like this. Malthus reached toward it with a trembling hand, then pulled back before touching it. Even the air above the crack felt wrong, warm and cold at once, humid yet sharp, like exhaling into a void that breathed back. He finally forced himself to stand. His legs quivered, not from weakness, from fear. For hours, minutes, he had been lost in the warp. Time there meant nothing, but now, back in the real world, he felt ruptured. Not physically, but in the places that truly mattered, the unseen lines where identity tethered itself to a soul. And that soul, it felt split. A door opened behind him with a hiss of pressurized air. Veritas entered. The chaplain's skull helm gleamed in the dimness, his crozius held in a firm grip. The moment he stepped into the chamber, his stride faltered. His black robes fluttered as he turned sharply toward the glowing fracture in the floor. "What is that?" His voice was a low growl, shaken but controlled. Malthus couldn't answer. Words trembled somewhere in his throat, but his voice refused to form them. Veritas approached the scar cautiously, lowering his crozius to scan the air around it. The relic hummed, runes flickering angrily as if reacting to pollution. Even the machine spirit within felt contaminated. "This mark reeks of the warp," the chaplain muttered, eyes narrowing behind the helm. "But it is confused. Wrong. It bears the signature of two different beings." A pause. A soft exhale. The sound of realization turning to dread. "No," Veritas whispered. "That is not possible." Malthus swallowed hard. His throat burned. "I saw them," he forced out. "Both of them. They were fighting over me." The chaplain stiffened. "Slaanesh," Malthus said slowly, the name tasting like crushed flowers and blood. In Nurgle, the second name felt like rot crawling down the back of his tongue. Veritas took a full step back. "That cannot be," he repeated, quieter now. "The gods of chaos do not share. They do not negotiate. They do not divide. Only Tzeentch meddles in such contests, and even he does not spark rivalry between them." The glowing crack pulsed, once, twice, like a heartbeat. Malthus flinched. Veritas felt it too. "It reacts to you." It Followed me back, Malthus whispered. The chaplain stared at him for a long moment. Though his face was hidden beneath the skull helm, Malthus could feel the weight of his gaze, harsh but not unkind. "What did you see?" Veritas asked at last. Malthus hesitated. The memories clawed at his mind, visions that felt more like wounds. But he forced himself to speak. "I saw my soul," he said. "And it was broken, split, cracked. They were pulling it apart, trying to twist it. One wanted pleasure. The other wanted decay. They want me, Veritas. Both of them." The chaplain whispered a short prayer under his breath. Not a ritual one, just a personal plea to the Emperor. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why you?" Malthus shook his head. "I don't know." But he did know. Deep down, in the cracks of his soul, in the quiet places where truth hides, he knew exactly why he was chosen. And the warp itself answered for him. The glowing split in the floor widened, just a hair, but enough for both of them to hear a faint, wet cracking sound, like bone being bent the wrong way. The chamber lights flickered, the odor of rotten perfume mingled. And then, a voice rose from the fracture. Not Nurgle, not Slaanesh, not even a demonic whisper. Not this time. This voice was Malthus. His voice, except distorted, split, like two versions of himself speaking in overlapping layers. "Because I do not belong wholly to one world anymore." Malthus stumbled back, heart pounding against his ribs like a hammer. Veritas raised his Crozius, but even the sacred weapon dimmed in the split's presence. The fracture pulsed again, and a symbol surfaced within the scar. A sigil of two halves pressed together, neither whole, neither dominant. A mark that was not meant to exist. A symbol of paradox, corruption, and violation of divine boundaries. A sigil carved in warp light. A sigil marking ownership of his soul, half green, half violet. A mark of Nurgle and Slaanesh. Together, Veritas' voice broke into a horrified rasp. That should not exist in any reality. Malthus felt the truth settle in his bones like a cold infection. They had already begun carving their claims into him. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a sign. This was a brand. The two gods had marked him. And they were not done. The sigil pulsed like a heartbeat carved into the very bones of the fortress. Once, twice, a slow, heavy rhythm, each throb radiating a pressure that scraped against Malthus' senses like claws on steel. He stared into the split in the stone floor, unable to look away. It felt like staring into a wound torn through reality, a raw opening where two impossible forces pressed their influence into the physical world. His body felt distant, like he was observing himself from across a foggy dream. But his mind was trapped squarely in the center of a storm. Veritas' voice cut through the oppressive silence like a blade. "Malthus," he said, stepping toward him with careful, deliberate steps, "look away from it." But he couldn't. The sigil shimmered, half rotting green, half intoxicating violet, both forces twisting around each other in a grotesque dance. It was mesmerizing, horrifying, seductive, disgusting, all at once. "Malthus!" Veritas barked now, his voice sharp, commanding. The spell broke. Malthus blinked hard, stumbling back from the glowing scar as if waking from a trance. He clutched his chest, feeling his two hard hearts pounding in disjointed rhythm, one racing, the other dragging. He felt uneven, like two separate pulses were fighting for dominance within him. Veritas stood between him and the sigil, Crozius raised in a defensive stance, though even the chaplain's holy weapon flickered uncertainly near the corruption. The room vibrated with tension. "Listen to me," Veritas said slowly. "Whatever has marked you, whatever has followed you, this cannot be allowed to take root. The warp's influence is subtle at first, but this is not subtle. This is a claim." Malthus swallowed hard. "I know. And yet they have not destroyed you," Veritas added. "They fight over you. They crave you. That alone should be impossible." Lightning cracked outside, casting a flash of white light through the chamber windows. Veritas' skull helm reflected the glare, turning him into a brief silhouette of bone against blinding illumination. "They want me for different reasons," Malthus whispered. "Nurgle wants my brokenness, my wounds, my suffering, and Slaanesh." He paused, breath shivering. "Slaanesh feeds on desire, on longing, on what I hide." Veritas' shoulders stiffened, but he remained silent, allowing the Marine to continue. "They're not corrupting me in the normal way," Malthus breathed. "They're dissecting me, pulling at the parts of myself I've never acknowledged, stretching them, twisting them." He ran a trembling hand over his face. "It feels like they're rewriting me." Veritas clenched his jaw beneath the helm and stepped closer. "You are Astartes," he said harshly. "One soul, reforged in fire. You do not break. You do not yield." But Malthus only shook his head. "Veritas," he whispered, "I am already breaking." Silence fell between them, thick, suffocating, honest. Then the sigil pulsed again. A wave of pressure washed through the chamber as the two colors flared violently, colliding in a brief spark that made the walls tremble. Malthus felt something slam into his mind, like a hammer made of emotion, memory, temptation, and decay. And suddenly, he wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was back in the warp. Just for an instant, but it was enough. Everything around him twisted into swirling wrought and shimmering silk. Two colossal shapes, one bloated, one beautiful, loomed on opposite horizons. A battlefield of desire and despair stretched out before them, and somewhere in that endless maelstrom, he heard his own voice crying out. Not speaking, not praying, screaming. He snapped back into the chamber with a gasp, collapsing onto one knee. Veritas caught him by the shoulder just before he struck the floor. "Malthus." The Marine shuddered violently, vision swimming with afterimages of the warp. "They pulled me back," Malthus rasped. "Just for a moment. Just to remind me they can." Veritas squeezed his shoulder tighter. "You will fight this," he said. "We will purge it." But the words rang hollow. Even Veritas felt the truth settling like a cold weight. This was beyond ritual, beyond exorcism, beyond anything a chaplain, or any mortal, could purify. The sigil in the floor brightened. A whisper rose, not loud, not violent, but soft, curling through the chamber like a serpent winding around a throat. Soon, another voice, wet, caressing, heavy, followed it. Very soon, Veritas' grip tightened. "They speak through it." "No," Malthus whispered, feeling cold dread tremor through his bones. "Not to it." He looked at the crack, now glowing so brightly that dust shook loose from the ceiling. "They're speaking, through me." The chamber lights exploded with a shower of sparks. The entire fortress trembled, and from the glowing split in the floor, a single strand of warp light, half green, half violet, rose like a tendril reaching for him. Not attacking, not consuming, simply touching. A caress, a claim, a promise. Veritas swung his Crozius down with a roar, smashing the tendril. Warp light sprayed outward like droplets of acid. The sigil recoiled, dimming back into a faint pulse. But Malthus remained frozen, eyes wide, breath shallow. He had felt it. Not pain, not corruption, recognition. Both gods were not merely fighting to claim him. They were learning him, understanding him, layer by layer, flaw by flaw, desire by desire, preparing for the greater pull. And worst of all, he felt something within himself respond. A tiny flicker of longing, unwanted, terrifying, tugged in his chest where his soul felt split. Maybe they can fill the emptiness. Maybe they can take away what hurts. Maybe they can make me feel. No. He choked the thought off immediately, horrified it had even surfaced. But both gods felt it. And they smiled. He didn't hear their laughter. He felt it, deep in his fractured soul. The crack in the floor pulsed one final time, then became still. Veritas slowly lowered his Crozius, its runes flickering erratically, struggling against the lingering taint. "Malthus," he said quietly, "this was not an attack." Malthus nodded shakily. "I know. This was a message." Another nod. "Yes. Veritas' voice dropped to a cold, grim whisper. And what was the message? Malthus swallowed hard, his lips parted, and with a hollow rasp that tasted like rotten perfume, he answered. They're not done with me.